Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Monica Alba in Washington, where the next steps in U.S. peace talks with Iran are unclear, with Vice President Vance's planned trip to Pakistan for in-person talks now in a holding pattern, and Pakistani mediators warning the ceasefire is set to expire before 8 p.m. tonight, as President Trump signals he's prepared to restart the war if there is no final deal. This hour, the president is set to hold an event at the White House with college athletes where he could provide an update on the war with Iran. If he does, we'll bring you those remarks. But for now, Vice President Vance and the rest of the negotiating team remain in Washington, with Vance, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and the president's son-in-law Jared Kushner all attending meetings at the White House today. Iran's foreign ministry saying today that no final decision has been made on whether Iran will participate in those talks, accusing the U.S. of inconsistent behavior and unacceptable actions. Mediators in Pakistan say they're trying to convince the Iranian leadership to come to the table. The standoff comes amid uncertainty as to when exactly the ceasefire formally expires, with Pakistan saying it lapses tonight, but President Trump telling Bloomberg yesterday that it expires at some point tomorrow. In a post on social media this morning, President Trump accused Iran of violating the ceasefire numerous times. And in an interview with CNBC today, he said he doesn't want to extend the ceasefire and he's prepared to resume strikes on Iran.
To be clear, you're saying that you need at least the prospects for a signed deal today and tomorrow, or else you would resume bombing Iran.
Well, I expect to be bombing because I think that's a better attitude to go in with. But we're ready to go. I mean, the military is raring to go. I want to make a good deal. I'm not going to be rushed. I have all the time in the world. I want to make not a good deal. I want to make a great deal.
It comes as the Trump administration is also escalating its enforcement operations at sea, intercepting vessels it says are providing material support to Iran. The Pentagon releasing this video of U.S. forces boarding a sanctioned tanker, this time in the Pacific. It's the second vessel U.S. troops have boarded in recent days. President Trump told CNBC the vessel had, quote, a gift from China for Iran, amid growing uneasiness about Beijing's support for Tehran as the war drags on. Joining me now are NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez, NBC News chief international correspondent Keir Simmons is in Islamabad, and NBC News national security reporter Gordon Lubold. Thank you all here for being here on these very fast-moving developments. And Gabe, what do we know about how the vice president has been spending today as we wait to see if this trip is even still on?
Yeah, that's right, Monica. Look, this is a very fluid situation here at the White House. We have from that source familiar with the discussions that Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, as well as the special envoy Steve Witkoff, are here at the White House meeting with the president, along with Vice President Vance, whose trip is now in a holding pattern as far as we know. As you said, though, we are expecting potentially to hear from the president within the next few minutes when he holds that event with NCAA athletes here at the White House. But it has been a very uncertain day as we've been hearing from Iranian officials, from the Pakistani mediators, and from President Trump earlier this morning, talking about the possibility of these negotiations. But as of now, Monica, this holding pattern we find ourselves in, waiting to hear what the final decision has been in order to find out whether the vice president is even making this trip to Islamabad.
Yeah, confusion there, Gabe, and confusion on some of these conflicting timelines on when the ceasefire actually expires. Do we have any clarity on when that deal ends?
No, we've been asking White House officials really throughout the day to provide some of that clarity. The president has said that the deadline is tomorrow. Pakistani mediators, however, say it is Wednesday morning in Pakistan, but that would mean it's within a few hours here Eastern time. So it is totally unclear when this ceasefire deadline would arrive. The president, though, as you said in your introduction, he has been saying that he is ready to resume bombing Iran if a deal is not struck. Again, though, all that remains up in the air at the moment, Monica.
And Gabe, the president also said today that the boat that the U.S. had seized yesterday did have this, quote, gift from China on board. How is the administration reacting to that, especially when the president does have that high-stakes meeting to China with the Chinese president in the coming weeks?
Oh, look, White House officials have been saying for the last several days that this trip, this summit with President Xi, highly anticipated meeting, is still on. But yes, the president raising some questions this morning in that interview with the CNBC when he was describing the so-called gift from China. Now, there are a lot of questions about whether this could be some dual-use equipment, perhaps. At least that's what it would be considered by Washington, and what knowledge President Xi and China had in any of this equipment, whether the U.S. administration considers it weapons coming from China to Iran, although President Xi, President Trump has denied that he will send any weapons to China. But all this comes just weeks before that highly anticipated meeting. Unclear how this all plays out, and again, unclear whether we get to these peace talks, which are scheduled, expected at least, in Islamabad. All of this, we're in a holding pattern here at the White House.
Gabe, watching it all from the North Lawn, thank you so much. I do now want to go to Keir, who is there. Keir, and that's the question right now. Do we think these talks are even going to take place where you are?
We have no idea, honestly. We thought that they would be this week. That's the indications that we were getting, and certainly the Pakistanis have been saying today that they have been in constant contact with the Iranians, persuading them, working to try to convince them to come here to Islamabad for these talks. I mean, we're in an extraordinary position where effectively the Trump administration is indicating pretty clearly that it would like to have the talks, and the Iranian regime is indicating that, frankly, it may not. And in fact, just before we came on air, Monica, Iranian media said that for now, and that I suppose is a small opening of a door, still, the decision by the Iranian regime is final, not to attend the talks on Wednesday. Now, why is that? Well, the Iranians are accusing the U.S. of contravening the ceasefire, just the same as President Trump today accused Iran of contravening the ceasefire. I think the taking of that Iranian cargo ship near the Strait of Hormuz in the past few days had a real impact, even if President Trump now saying that there were supplies on it from the Chinese for the Iranians, raising questions about that. And frankly, the simple fact is that there's just an enormous gulf in trust. The question now, of course, is either side as prepared to go back to war as they are saying they are?
Yeah, and the president had said that the bombs will start falling if this ceasefire expires. But the question that we've been trying to discuss and find the answer to is that we don't know when that actually happens. What's your sense from the Pakistani side of things about when the ceasefire does actually end, and why did they choose that time versus the time it seems the president has been talking about, which would be tomorrow evening?
I don't know. I mean, look, the Pakistanis said in their statement in the past few hours that the ceasefire runs out in the early hours of the morning here, 4 in the morning here or thereabouts. Why they think that, I think it's to do with when President Trump announced the ceasefire 2 weeks ago. Of course, it's President Trump's ceasefire. So in a sense, it's for him to decide when it ends. And he is, of course, the actor in all of this who has said that he doesn't want to extend the ceasefire. It's quite clear to me that a number of governments, including the Pakistanis, have been trying to persuade President Trump to extend that ceasefire. Of course, the trouble is what President Trump is trying to do is gain leverage over the Iranians by demonstrating that he is prepared to go back to war, that he is prepared to inflict more punishment on them. On the other hand, the Iranians believe that they've survived all that and that they can survive again. And I guess in a way, if it comes to that, this will be again a kind of race, a dismal race between whether the Iranian economy or the world economy suffers most.
And the president had said it was highly unlikely he could extend this deadline again, but maybe now he will. Keir Simmons, thank you so much for being there and bringing us that report from Islamabad. Gordon, I do want to turn to you now to talk a little bit more about this vessel that was boarded, this time in the Pacific. What more do we know about that incident?
Right. So very little, honestly. The U.S. forces boarded the ship. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff recently at the Pentagon said, this kind of search for any boats of supporting Iran goes global, and this is the first example of that. I point out that the U.S. Marines are still on the other boat that was boarded over the weekend. That's in near the Strait of Hormuz. And so, what they're finding obviously takes some time and kind of figuring out what they will do now with these ships. It sounds like there was a gift from China on this one, but we don't know much more about it. But I think that these boardings, we could see a lot more of them as time unfolds.
Let's talk more about that, because we have seen these two in recent days. So does that indicate to you do think there will be more maritime interdictions? This is something that the U.S. military is prepared to do, trains to do, but how many more do you think we could see?
This is an easy signal send from the Trump administration to Iran and to ships, and ships kind of maybe seeking safe harbor, as it were, around the world if they're supporting Iran. It's an easy operation in that sense. I shouldn't say it's easy, but it's just to your point. U.S. forces trained exactly this, and I think there's no problem in them doing more of them. They have the forces, they have the wherewithal to do this. And I think, as I say, it's just an important message right now.
The president keeps saying that the military is ready to go if he does decide he wants to resume dropping bombs. But talk to us a little bit about the specific threats that he's been making in recent days against the power plants and bridges specifically. So if this ceasefire is off, is the sense that would be where he goes next, those military targets?
I think that there's no question. Of course, this is all in the mind of President Trump, and I think sometimes he even doesn't know exactly what he's going to do the next move. But I think it's clear that if he decides, these talks are over and he wants to resume strikes, that can happen anytime. It could happen tonight, it could happen tomorrow, it could happen, so we don't know. But certainly from the get-go, U.S. military forces in the region have been ready for any manner of strikes, and I'm sure they're ready to go back at it. And so those sites are these kind of potentially dual-purpose sites. I think there's some legal debate about whether they are valid, but yeah, could go after them quickly.
Gordon Lubold, thank you so much for your reporting. I do want to go back to Gabe Gutierrez, because I understand that President Trump has just issued a message about exactly what we were discussing. Gabe, what is the latest? What can you tell us?
Well, Monica, just within the past few moments, President Trump posting on social media that he is extending the ceasefire, but he will continue the blockade of Iranian ports. And the president writing at the request of Pakistani officials, we've been asked to hold our attacks on the country of Iran until such a time as their leaders and representatives can come up with a unified proposal. The president also saying that the government of Iran is seriously fractured. So, Monica, this all comes after a day of rapid-fire developments where the vice president was expected to leave for Pakistan, staying here in Washington, meeting with the president. There's been a series of meetings with Jared Kushner and with Steve Witkoff throughout the day. And now we're hearing from the president of the United States that he's doing something that he said he did not want to do even earlier today, extending the ceasefire. Again, we are, as we read through this right now, go ahead, Monica.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about what you just said, which is that this is language he used that was identical to the last time that he extended the ceasefire, which was 2 weeks ago. Prior to that, he had said it was highly unlikely that he would push this deadline back again. Then he did. Here we are again today, where before this, that's the exact same thing he said. It was highly unlikely he would do it, but not impossible. So talk a little bit more about that. And also that issue of the blockade, because that had been a really key sticking point, right, for the Iranian side of negotiations.
Well, certainly, look, and as you were just speaking about with Keir, Iranian state media now saying that these negotiations are off. And part of the reason that they cite is this, what they see as an act of piracy on the part of the United States, with the U.S. military enforcing that blockade on Iranian ports, seizing that vessel on Sunday. But yes, you're right, Monica. I remember you were here at the White House. You asked the president about this several weeks ago, and he said it was highly unlikely he would extend the ceasefire. He is now extending the ceasefire. Also, just announcing it right now after markets close. The markets close at 4 p.m. And we're expecting to hear from the president within the next few minutes, potentially, here at this unrelated event at the White House. But again, that breaking news just within the past few minutes, the president announcing that his ceasefire deadline is extended, but that the U.S. will continue to enforce that blockade on Iranian ports.
And Gabe, tell us a little bit more about what we know took place at the White House today. We haven't seen the president on camera in a couple of days. He certainly did that lengthy interview this morning with CNBC, but it does seem that there was a lot of behind-the-scenes discussion and closed-door meetings to try to figure out some of these next steps. What do we know about how those went and who was in them?
That's right. Well, look, White House officials have kept a very tight lips on what has happened here at the White House throughout the day. We had expected the vice president potentially at some point today to board that plane for Pakistan, but we learned that he was instead coming here to the White House. And then several hours later, we heard that it was those negotiators, Steve Witkoff, as well as Jared Kushner, that were arriving here as well to jump in on those policy meetings with the vice president and President Trump. Again, we don't know exactly what communication they may have had. It appears they have been speaking with the Pakistanis, according to President Trump's message on social media, that Pakistan has been communicating the Iranian position to the U.S. But there you see it right there. The president, once again, calling it the government of Iran seriously fractured and extending this ceasefire until they can come up with a unified proposal. Of course, this comes as the president had ramped up his rhetoric, his threats against the Iranian regime over the weekend, and yet late last week he had been saying that the people he had been speaking with in Iran were much more reasonable than the previous regime. So a lot of conflicting messaging there from the president. Now extending that ceasefire after a day of a holding pattern here at the White House, Monica.
Gabe, thank you so much for bringing us that breaking news.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.